Stretching from Europe to the Pacific, Russia is impossible to miss on a map. But here's what your atlas won't tell you. Russia is actually two countries, occupying two different and very distinct spaces. Head far enough east and it turns into a ghost country. Russia's borders are familiar to everyone, but there's one invisible boundary that goes unmarked. Take a look right here. These are the Ural Mountains. They stretch over 1,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers from the Arctic Ocean to the Caspian Sea, and they divide one Russia from another. 77% of Russian territory is east of this line, but it's the polar opposite when it comes to the people. Only 25% of Russia's people live in this vast, forbidding land. And that number is declining. It doesn't need to be that way. In fact, it probably shouldn't be that way, but it is. And here's why. We know what you're thinking. It's all because of the weather, right? Well, you're not completely wrong. The climate makes life out here pretty difficult. The average daily high temperature for the year is 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius. But remember, that's only the average. Siberia is a place of extremes. Take this town. It's Oymyakon in Russia's far eastern Sakha Republic. It's the coldest permanently inhabited town in the world, with the thermometer reaching a record low of 90 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, negative 67.7 Celsius. The people here are so hardy that schools are only closed when the temperature plunges below negative 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 55 below Celsius. And you thought your snow days were rough. Only Antarctica gets colder than Siberia's harshest days. Let's be honest, it's probably not on your bucket list of places to live. But here's a question. Would you rather get rich in a harsh environment or stay poor somewhere comfortable? Because Siberia is and always has been the key to Russia's future. Russia has always been a country of deep contradictions. That neat line through the Urals is just one of them. At the start of 2025, its economy was the world's 11th largest, with a nominal GDP of $2.2 trillion and a 2024 GDP per capita of $14,900, according to the World Bank. That total GDP is smaller than the likes of Italy and Brazil, while its GDP per capita is lower than Costa Rica's. But it shouldn't be like that. Russia is sitting on so much buried treasure, it would make old explorers and pirates think they died and gone to heaven. When it comes to natural resources, Russia is the undisputed champion of the world. It has an estimated $75 trillion worth of resources it can tap. That far exceeds any other country, even the United States, which comes in a distant second place with $45 trillion. And if you think that these resources are limited to the ones you know about from the news, think again. Obviously, there's hydrocarbons. Russia is an energy powerhouse. In 2020, it had the world's largest proven reserve of natural gas at 1.32 quadrillion cubic feet, 37.3 trillion cubic meters, and about 80 billion proven barrels of oil, ranking it 8th on the planet. And then there's the 78% of Russia's natural gas reserves that are located in Siberia. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. We wouldn't have brought up old-time treasure hunters if there wasn't gold, and lots of it. Russia is one of the world's leading producers. In 2023, it had 322 tons of domestic supply, but consumed only 71 of them. That's valuable not just for jewelry, but for industrial uses. In fact, the device you're watching this video on probably has some gold in it. Don't take it apart though, that gold is useful to help conduct the electricity. This should clue you in on something. Russia doesn't need to rely on the resources and treasures of yesteryear. The United States Geological Survey estimates that Russia has 3.8 million tons of rare earth metals, making it the world's 5th largest trove. The Sakha Republic in eastern Siberia alone has at least 1.7 million tons of rare earth material at its Tomtor deposit. Russia says it actually has a reserve of 28.7 million total rare earth tons. Take that for what it's worth, which is probably not much, but even if the numbers are fudged, it's still a lot, and demand for these critical metals is surging. They're needed for modern digital technologies. For example, neodymium is used in magnets, electric motors, and to make smaller, more efficient memory storage drives for computers. Also, are you watching this video on an OLED screen? If you are, you probably appreciate the bright, vivid colors that make everything so easy to remember. Terbium was probably used for that. And there's more, but we'll get to that later. What we're trying to say is whatever you want in the world, Siberia probably has it. Whether it's arable land for farming, fish in the seas, timber, iron ore for steel, diamonds for that engagement ring you can't afford, or even beryllium for potential nuclear fusion reactors, you'll find it here. If it meant getting in on all this action, you could handle the cold, right? It sounds far-fetched from the comfort of your chair, but stick with us as we look across the 51 miles, 82 kilometers of the Bering Strait. Alaska was once Russian territory, but it was never a big part of the empire. There were about 10,500 people under the direct government of the Russian Fur Company at the time the Americans purchased it, at least according to the mastermind of the idea, Secretary of State William Seward. The deal was called Seward's Folly at the time. A look at the thermometer will clue you in on what the people back then were thinking. The Russians largely avoided Alaska for a reason, or so it seemed. Temperatures in the winter routinely drop to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 34 Celsius in Fairbanks, and they can get as low as negative 38 Fahrenheit, negative 39 Celsius in extreme conditions in Anchorage. But soon, there was a gold rush, and tens of thousands of settlers poured in, braving the cold and more because what's a little frostbite when you're rich? By the 20th century, the United States understood the geographic and strategic value of Seward's Folly. It sent men and resources to defend the area in World War II and built the Alaska or Alkan Highway to ensure the territory was connected with the contiguous United States through Canada. The road was completed in 1942, and returning troops came back with stories of Alaska's wondrous natural beauty. More people moved in, and more roads were built. Alaska has almost 17,700 miles, 28,500 kilometers of them, according to its Department of Transportation. Other infrastructure investments came hot on the road's heels, especially when oil was discovered in 1968. Enter the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. It was tough work. The cold climate and permafrost proved to be enormous challenges, but the engineers got it done, and the state has benefited enormously ever since. Oil revenues have allowed for stable governance of the state and even a universal basic income, the Alaska Permanent Fund. Annual payouts typically range between $1,000 and $2,000 per person every year. Also, Alaska's strategic location means that the U.S. military has 9 bases in the state, which brings jobs and ensures continued federal support for the state's infrastructure. Alaska is still a tough climate to live in, but with all of this to go around, more people are gritting their teeth and doing it. The state had a population of just over 733,000 in the 2020 U.S. Census. That was up by over 23,000 compared to the 2010 census. That's not the case in Siberia. Start by looking at the city of Norilsk in Krasnoyarsk Krai, right in the heart of Siberia. It's the second largest settlement north of the Arctic Circle, so the weather here can get pretty harsh. Even in July, the daily mean temperature is only 58 degrees Fahrenheit, 14.5 Celsius, but it is getting warmer, and in early 2015, a local craftsman noticed something odd. His floor was beginning to tilt downward. It didn't take an expert eye to confirm this, though his wife said the same thing. As it turned out, their building was actually sinking beneath their feet. Melting permafrost was slowly eroding its foundation, and the structure needed to be condemned. The problem isn't just with the warming climate, though. Badly designed engineering is also playing a part. Heat from the sewers and chemical pollution are also melting the permafrost. And that's not the only thing that can make life out here hard. Norilsk is the most polluted city in Russia. There was an almost biblical scene out here in 2016 when the Daldikan River turned bright red. But the Russian government couldn't just blame it on the wrath of God. That would have been an easy get out. The cause was a chemical spill from a nearby factory that was subsequently forced to shut down. And the river wasn't the only thing wrong with this city. It was just the most extreme example. The locals also often complain about black or red snow, or the blue fog that makes their throats itchy. They even claimed to know the taste of different gases leaking from the pipes. One man said the gas from copper had a sweet flavor. Nickel, he said, tasted different, which is a neat party trick. But these are becoming increasingly common occurrences in Siberia, and it's not going to be fixed anytime soon. Let's blissfully head back to Alaska for a moment. It has its share of environmental problems too, but both Juneau and Washington are actually trying to be responsible about them. No one would ever call the United States a model for how to treat indigenous people, but Washington is at least more active than Moscow in trying to make up for past mistakes. And there's the spending to prove it. A 2022 Government Accountability Office report found that the federal government spent $391 million between fiscal years 2016 and 2020 to repair damaged infrastructure in native Alaskan villages and protect them from future environmental threats. The support network between the capitals and the locals ensures that there's a quality of life that all residents in Alaska can come to expect, which is partly why the population of the state is growing. Meanwhile, in Russia, it's estimated that adapting the northern cities to the warmer temperatures would make the buildings in them 30 to 40% more expensive. And you'd also have to pour in millions more just to adapt or replace aging sewer systems and faulty pipelines. Modernizing Siberia's infrastructure won't be cheap. That's going to be a hard sell for a place with so few people living there. Russia isn't like the United States. Its government doesn't need to worry about negative media coverage. In Putin's Russia, the media is tightly controlled, and people are forced to consume news they don't trust. These sorts of problems are low on Moscow's list of priorities. But let's head back to the Sakha Republic to find another example of what life in Siberia can really be like. Start with Oymyakon. It gets so cold that it lacks indoor plumbing for much of the year. The people who live here need to resort to outhouses. But there was one day that really showed how extreme life can be in this remote region. There was a dark wind blowing in the Sakha Republic on July 20th, 2018. 40% of this territory is north of the Arctic Circle, so the locals aren't used to seeing dark nights at this time of year. But on that day, the sun disappeared. It wasn't an eclipse, and the sky was clear. So why did the sun go missing? Wildfires. In Sakha, they're no longer a rare occurrence. They're expected. When the warm weather arrives, it often brings smoke instead of sunshine. On that day in 2018, thick layers of wildfire smoke from the south converged over remote villages, blotting out the sun completely. And with millions of acres of forest, little infrastructure, and even fewer resources, managing those fires is nearly impossible. But the extreme conditions and less than great quality of life in the cities still don't solve most of the mystery. People have been willing to go to much further extremes with much less of a reward waiting for them. Alaska's Yukon Gold Rush should be more than enough proof of that. Vladimir Putin plans on taking advantage of this basic human drive. He wants to make Russia one of the world's top 5 producers of rare earth materials and make up 12% of the global market share by 2030. He won't be able to succeed, though. There's a reason why the Russian Far East only accounts for 5% of the country's GDP, despite all its resources. Russia has really bad geography when it comes to moving things around. Despite its almost 24,000 miles, 38,600 kilometers of coastline, it only ranks 36th in terms of the world's total container traffic, with 3.9 million 20-foot equivalent units according to World Bank data. That's because to ship things around the Russian coastline, commercial voyages need to move into the treacherous, icy waters of the Arctic Ocean and deal with ports that are likely to have ice too. Russia has the world's largest fleet of icebreakers with 57 to try and compensate for this. 8 of these are nuclear-powered so they can stay at sea for lengthy periods, but they're expensive to build and operate. So, to move its goods around, there are 2 other options. The most natural thought is to move them by road or rail, and this is where the biggest problem comes in. Take out that map of Russia again and look at its roads. Then compare them with Alaska's. While Alaska's settlements are well connected, you'll see that Siberia has only one major road, and it runs along the region's southern stretch. This is the Trans-Siberian Highway, and it's a giant. It's the third longest road in the world, spanning a distance of 6,800 miles, nearly 11,000 kilometers between St. Petersburg and Vladivostok. But look at where that highway starts, and you'll notice something else. European Russia, west of the Urals, is well connected by road, in stark contrast to the Asian part of Russia. It's much the same when it comes to the railway network. The European heartland is well connected, but only southern Siberia sees traffic along the Trans-Siberian Railway, which runs from Moscow to Vladivostok. This lack of connectivity is partially by design. It helps keep Siberia down. But you might have suspected this by now. Siberia was never a natural part of Russia. It was and still is an imperial project, one that was annexed sort of by accident. The Russians moved east to the Urals as part of a plan to acquire naturally defensible borders to prevent another invasion from the Mongols or the Tatars, who had once ruled them with an iron fist. But as adventurers moved further east, they discovered a treasure on the opposite side. Sure, the place was a giant icebox, even by their homeland standards, but that was a feature, not a bug. Siberia had plenty of life, after all, critters that were well adapted to their harsh environment. There were Arctic foxes, sables, lynx, otters, and even tigers, and they all had really thick fur to keep them warm. These adventurers soon understood that the furs could be sold at an enormous profit in Europe. They were perfect for making warm textiles, and since the world was in the midst of a cooler period, called the Little Ice Age, the timing was perfect. Russia began to annex Siberia. The furs sold like crazy, and Russia's Tsars got the cash they needed to expand their military ambitions. It sounds familiar, and then, much like now, the locals didn't see much or any of the money. The arrangement was exploitative from the start. The Russians set up trading posts throughout Siberia. Meanwhile, the locals would be forced to provide regular fur tributes, but they didn't have much connection with European Russia, where all the action was. The territory was all part of the mother country, but Siberia looked more like an overseas colony than an extension of Russia proper. It was sort of a model for the European empires that would follow. While those colonial empires are gone now, Russia's imperial arrangement with Siberia remains. The rail and road network is good for Moscow to maintain its control of its Siberian territory, but it's not so great at serving the actual people who live out here. To find out why, let's take a road trip. The Trans-Siberian Highway is paved with asphalt or concrete along its entire length, and that's a good thing. Considering the sheer length of the road, it's an impressive engineering achievement, but not all asphalt and concrete are created equal. The quality of the road isn't the same everywhere. Once you go east of the Urals, the road's condition starts to deteriorate sharply. But it's not for the reason you think. Obviously, driving on an icy road for such long distances will always be dangerous, but in Siberia, the rain is the real enemy. Siberia has a rainy season. Well, sort of. The rain peaks in August, with 0.08 inches, 0.2 centimeters of water falling on average a day. That might not sound like a lot, but it translates to about 3.5 pints, 2 liters of water on 10.7 square feet, 1 square meter per day. Overall, you can expect significant rain between June and October. This isn't anything like the monsoon seasons in places far to the south, but there's more precipitation to go around in the summer. Here's the thing though. Alaska actually has a wetter climate. It's just that Alaska can take better care of its roads. The buildup of water along the remote Trans-Siberian Highway means that you're sure to encounter obstacles and quagmires along your journey. It doesn't help that road services are very lacking. A road journey here wouldn't be anything like one in Alaska, which still benefits from America's interstate highway system despite its distance. Gas stations or accommodations will be hard to find here. Travel guides advise would-be drivers to potentially prepare to camp out or even to stay in people's houses. Maybe camping doesn't sound so bad, in the summer at least. Siberia offers something rare these days. Its vast wilderness can mean some stunning night skies, but there's something else waiting for you. Plagues of mosquitoes. Have lots of bug spray and netting around if you plan on spending your time outdoors. These are the sorts of things travelers in Siberia have to deal with all the time. To get a sense of how isolated Siberian towns can be from each other, even along the Trans-Siberian Highway, consider this. Imagine you're in Irkutsk, in the oblast of the same name. Lake Baikal is nearby, so perhaps you've enjoyed it for a while, but now you need to get to Vladivostok. According to Google Maps, you have a driving distance of almost 2,400 miles, over 3,800 kilometers. To put that into perspective, it's longer than the distance between Chicago and Los Angeles, and it takes an estimated 52 hours and 56 minutes of driving to get from one place to the other. Better have a good playlist set up. What about the trains? Google data suggests a train ride of 71 hours and 52 minutes to travel the same distance. Nearly 3 solid days of pure travel. But a drive between Chicago and Los Angeles will probably be much shorter in the amount of time you need to spend on the road. And it's not just because of the shorter distance. The estimate is 28 hours 55 minutes by car on average and 43 hours 32 minutes by train, according to our Google Maps estimate. Siberia is just a much harsher and more treacherous environment to pass through, with fewer things to support travel. Overall, a journey along the entirety of the Trans-Siberian Highway can take a month or more. The trip along the rail line winds up being a little shorter because of the shorter distance and nature of the beast. Non-stop, you can expect to stay on the rails for a week, but with stops, the length of your excursion grows. It can last several weeks. This is all okay if the Russian government needs to move troops or equipment somewhere. It's not so great for the locals or for the development of their economy. Once again, this reality isn't just a bug. It's a feature of the imperial nature of the Siberian project. To see what we mean, voyage thousands of miles west to Ukraine. You would have been able to go from Vladivostok to Kiev along the railway a few years ago, but the special military operation changed that. Now, instead of tapping Siberia's natural resources, Moscow is tapping its men. The special military operation didn't go according to Putin's plans. A few months after it began, he found his forces on the run, so he got desperate. He just announced that the 4 Ukrainian provinces his troops partially occupied were now part of Russia. There was no way he could just give up so soon. He needed manpower and got it in the place you'd probably expect. By the end of 2023, the first full year of mobilization, it was clear that not all Russians were suffering the same. 6 of the 10 Russian regions with the highest mortality rates were east of the Ural Mountains. Here's a fact that might stun you even more. Take out your map again and look at the Republic of Buryatia in Russia's far east. Men from this remote place along the Trans-Siberian Highway were 75 times more likely to be killed in action than their counterparts in Moscow, despite its population being 13 times bigger. But if you're a dictator, it's easier to cover up mass funerals when truth seekers would need to venture for thousands of miles along the treacherous Trans-Siberian Highway to find out what's really going on. You don't even need to do anything dirty to the journalists brave enough to try to find the answers. The open road is your best friend. From that perspective, why bother to improve it at all? Improving the road network would go far in developing the economy, but it might also undermine Moscow's central control of Siberia. At least on some level, Moscow wants the Siberian minorities to be isolated from each other. That was how Russia was able to extend its control so far to the east in the first place. But this raises a curious problem. With all of this in mind, why did Siberia's population grow to begin with, especially in the 20th century? And why weren't the necessary infrastructure improvements made then? To begin finding out the answers, just look at the town of Magadan in the oblast of the same name. It was one of the darkest periods in Russia's modern history. Once it was put into the Russian fold, Siberia was always a popular place to exile political undesirables. The most famous of them was a young man named Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known as Vladimir Lenin. The Soviet Union was supposed to free people from the Tsar's tyranny, but he began a regime that would far exceed anything the hated Romanovs ever did. His unwanted successor Joseph Stalin had grand plans for Siberia, and exiles were at the heart of it. The fur trade might have lost its luster by the early 20th century, but he knew about the other fantastic resources Siberia had to offer. How to develop them? His answer was simple and brutal. Experts estimate that Stalin sent 18 million people to the gulags during his time in power. Magadan hosted some of the most notorious of them. There was gold here, so the undesirables were forced to mine. And it wasn't just the men. Women panned for it too. Even children who were considered troublesome were sent to forced labor colonies. Overall, 3 million people died here between 1931 and Stalin's death in 1953. And you can still find the most ominous project they worked on if you look at a map. There is a highway in the north that connects Magadan with Nizhny Bestyak on the Lena River's east bank, opposite Yakutsk. This is Federal Highway 504, or the Kolyma Highway. The name sounds appropriately neutral, unlikely to stir up powerful emotions, but it wasn't that way to the people that built it. They knew it by a couple of other names. The estimates vary about how many people died building this road. The CIA used to think it was 3 million, but that was a confusion with all the people who died from all the work in the Gulag. Modern scholars estimate that only 130,000 people died while building the road. The work was brutal. People were shot for not doing enough of it or simply died from the tough conditions. They often had nothing more to help them than shovels and wheelbarrows, and temperatures got as cold as -94 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 below Celsius. The dead were buried beneath the road's foundations, hence the name Road of Bones. Or if you prefer, you can call it by its other name, the Highway of Death. But this highway doesn't look like any you'd be used to seeing, though. Only about 8% of its total length is paved, the 99 miles, 159 kilometers nearest to Magadan. Elsewhere, the road is mostly gravel and clay that turns into a muddy quagmire whenever the rains come. If you want to travel this road, you'll have a better bet when it's icy, but your best move is to go during Siberia's drier, warm months, like May. Going during the height of summer is impractical, and it's not a road you can just drive on with the car in your garage thanks to its extreme state of disrepair. Travel guides report that the road can experience traffic jams for 62 miles, 100 kilometers. The original Road of Bones was such a disaster that in 2008, a 124-mile, 200-kilometer stretch between Tomtor and Kadykchan was bypassed. Now, it's called the Old Summer Road. Sounds pretty nice, huh? Don't fall for it, though. This place is no peaceful drive on the California coastline, or its Alaskan counterpart for that matter. This part of Siberia looks kind of like Chernobyl, with tiny ghost towns being reclaimed by the wilderness. This was the dismal result of an actual attempt to improve road access in northern Siberia. Few real attempts have been made since. How ironic is it that the road was closed near Tomtor, where all the rare earths are? That's Siberia for you. Settlements in these remote places don't usually look like industrial towns. They look more like Chersky. Where's Chersky? It's another town in the Sakha Republic. It gets really cold, with winter temperatures below -50 Fahrenheit. 45 below Celsius. It's north of the Arctic Circle, and not one of Russia's major road networks comes anywhere near here. So it's buried under snow and ice for 8 months of the year. The cold isn't completely the enemy, though. When the rivers freeze over, deliveries to it can be made by truck over the ice. The other best way to move things around is by turboprop plane. The nearest city is Yakutsk, 4.5 hours away, by flight. If this strikes you as an odd place for human habitation, you're not wrong. It's not like Alaska. The settlement started as a top-down directive from Moscow. You guessed it, it's another one of Stalin's gulags. Even Norilsk isn't safe from the atmosphere of neglect and exploitation that defines Moscow's policy towards Siberia. And it shows you why Putin's dream of becoming one of the centers of the world's energy transition is likely to fail. Remember that nickel tasted different from the sweeter copper? That's a critical resource for the future. It's an important metal in the booming electric car industry because it makes for fantastic batteries. Nickel-based batteries aren't only lighter and more compact, they offer more energy density. And then there's palladium. It's nice and shiny, perfect for jewelry, and it's rare. 30 times rarer than even gold. Gasoline-powered cars need it for catalytic converters, but it will still have uses even as those vehicles start to get phased out in favor of electrics. The device you're watching this video on also uses palladium because it's resistant to most corrosive forces. An increasing amount of the energy you charged that device with will come because of palladium too. It can be rolled into sheets, which are useful for solar panels. As fate would have it, 40% of the world's palladium is mined right here in Norilsk. It's a byproduct of the nickel mining industry. But as important as this town is, it can't escape its past. Stalin understood the value of the nickel here too, and yet it's another one of his former gulags. Because of that, Norilsk is nowhere near the Trans-Siberian Highway or railway. It instead relies on one railway, the 206-mile, 332-kilometer Norilsk Railway that connects the city to the port of Dudinka. Naturally, it was built by the Gulag's prisoners in the 1930s. The sacrifice by these prisoners wasn't entirely wasted. The railroad functioned much better than the Road of Bones. It opened in 1937, and you could expect a trip between 10 and 12 hours, in good weather. And let's be honest, the weather rarely gets good in Siberia. The journey usually took 24 hours. Still, that was a success by Siberian standards, so Moscow had more ambitious plans for the Norilsk Railway. It would be just one leg on the northern version of the Trans-Siberian. When done, it would go from the Barents Sea to the Sea of Okhotsk, connecting all of the territories north of the Arctic Circle. That never happened. Stalin died in 1953, the gulags closed, and the railway still doesn't connect to other parts of Russia, nor do the local roads. Oh well, at least the trains are much faster today because the railway was converted to a broader gauge. Toward the end, trips took around 3 or 4 hours. But notice the past tense. The Norilsk Railway saw a steep decline after the Soviet Union collapsed, and today it doesn't even take passengers. The last passenger train stopped in 1998. It's for freight only now. To make up for it, the locals can at least expect the roads to be clear of snow now, which wasn't always the case. But the roads don't connect to other parts of Russia either. They're local only. That's why the people here call their city an island, and the rest of the country the mainland. Now, the only way to get in or out of the area is to go to the port and take a ship in the Arctic Ocean, or go to the airport. It's located 22 miles, 35 kilometers to the west. That's Elkel International Airport, though it only got its international status 2 years ago. Waiting for a bus could be a challenge though. Stay out too long, and you might just freeze to death. At least 250,000 of the imprisoned laborers who built Norilsk in the 1930s died for their efforts. The city leaves a legacy that Putin would love to tap into. One of the locals talking to the New York Times put it best. Norilsk is a unique city. It was put here by force. It's 1,800 miles, 2,900 kilometers northeast of Moscow, springing out of the wilderness not because of its location, but because Stalin demanded it. It's like an island surrounded by unending wild tundra. So, who lives here? In 1939, the population was around 13,900 people, but it continued to grow and reached a peak in 1979 at over 180,000. Its fate mirrored the Soviet Union's. As it entered a decline in the 1980s, so did the population of Norilsk. 3.2% of the people left in the Soviet Union's last decade. And then came the collapse. By 2002, nearly 135,000 people remained in Norilsk, a 22% decline compared to its Soviet-era population. We'll return to Norilsk shortly, but its fate tells us why Siberia got much of the population it now has, doesn't it? People didn't come here to live by choice. The glories of communism sent them, and the gulags were just one of the methods the Soviet Union used. The world condemned Putin's self-declared annexation of Crimea in 2014, but there was one group that was especially afraid. The 2021 Russian census counted over 284,000 Crimean Tatars as living on the peninsula, which make up 12.7% of its population. But in the 1970 census, there were none. So what happened? Stalin accused the entire ethnic group of collaborating with Nazis during World War II. In response, he forcibly deported them at gunpoint. Most were sent to Soviet Uzbekistan, while around 30,000 were exiled to remote, frozen regions of Siberia. And they weren't alone. Ethnic Germans from the Volga region were also sent to Siberia, as were Kalmyks. A Human Rights Watch report published just before the Soviet Union's collapse estimated 4.7 million people deported across 10 ethnic groups. The Tatars were just the most infamous example. And now we've arrived at the truth. Siberia's population didn't grow by choice. It was driven there. After Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev denounced the regime's brutality, and once the system began to crack, the canary started singing in the frozen coal mine. The deported people began to return home if they still had one. The Crimean Tatars were among the last, only regaining a foothold during Gorbachev's reforms in the late 1980s. The trend continues to the present day. Russia still might be in the habit of forcibly deporting people. It's why Putin will be hauled up in the International Criminal Court if he ever steps foot on the soil of one of its participating countries. But Moscow isn't doing it to its own people, at least not at the moment. Now free of Soviet central planning, the population can vote with its feet, and it is. At first, it looked like Russia's economic recovery would bring people back. Norilsk saw a 30% increase in its population by 2010, bouncing back nicely from the post-Soviet low. Almost 175,000 people were counted there in that year's census. Perhaps Putin's idea is right after all, and people will put up with the harsh conditions if the financial reward is high enough. No, at least for now. In 2021, the population of Norilsk declined again. It was only 0.5%, but that's not the same elsewhere. Since 1991, the population of the Russian Far East has declined by around 20%. The Siberian Federal District has a similar fate. It grew constantly in Soviet times, but has fallen by 10% since then, from 18.6 to 16.8 between 1989 and 2021. Putin still wants to reverse these trends. The Trans-Siberian Railway has one benefit. Unlike the highway, it connects to other junctions. The Baikal-Amur main line to Sovetskaya Gavan is one, but the other two are more important. The Trans-Mongolian and Trans-Manchurian lines connect with Beijing, and it makes doing business with China easier. But the locals don't feel like they're benefiting from this business. They're more worried about China taking over. The Chinese once planned to build a bottling plant at Lake Baikal and a pipeline to connect it with arid Lanzhou. The ideas sparked mass protests in 2019 and 2022 respectively, and the projects never got off the ground. The locals don't feel like any of the Chinese investments in the region will benefit them, for good reason. But don't worry, Moscow is offering other incentives. In 2014, then Prime Minister Medvedev said he'd personally supervise a slew of financial incentives to get people to move and invest in Siberia. Want no land, income, or property taxes for 5 years? That's what Moscow was now offering. What about free land? In 2016, Putin started to offer 2.8 acres, 1 hectare, to any Russian citizen or even foreign national that lived in the Far East for at least 5 years. But none of it is working. Just look at a map of the migration trends in Russia. Between 2014 and 2018, the fastest growing parts of Russia were mostly west of the Urals. That's because the lack of connectivity and harsh weather aren't worth it. Almost all the wealth from Siberia's treasure trove is going to enrich Putin, his cronies, and even the Chinese before the locals see anything. Living in Siberia is an investment that doesn't pay off. It takes rather than gives, and it doesn't look like that cycle will break anytime soon. One woman, a then 25-year-old kindergarten teacher from Chersky, put it best when she spoke to the independent Moscow Times in 2011. Quote, "We don't live here. We merely survive. It's impossible to live here. We need to get away." Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MapPack.